I use recruiters very rarely
Hmm.
because I never find who I want through a recruiter. It's mostly network.
Okay.
If you want to get into Cleantech, go to Cleantech events,
Yeah.
business plan competitions, but more so go to the accelerator events, go to Climate Week and those events. That's where you meet all the entrepreneurs. And when you speak to people and have a common interest and learn more about it, it's very hard to get into an industry like that when you've never worked in a startup and there's not like clear overlap between what you're doing and what they need.
Yeah.
But you can move in that direction. You can start doing projects with companies and stuff. It really depends on where you are in your life. If you're in university, super easy.
Yeah.
If you want to get into it after you've had a career for 20 or 30 years, it's a lot harder, but it's still definitely doable. The first step is to meet those people, talk to them, get to know them, offer help where you can, show that you can bring a lot to the table.
Hey, folks, and welcome to this latest episode of the Sustainable Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Raf, and today we are talking to Dr. Marshall Cox, founder of Kelvin. We'll talk about the challenges of energy consumption in urban areas and the role of smart technologies in building an energy-efficient future. I learned a ton from Marshall about the science behind this stuff, the technology, and about entrepreneurship. I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. So I'm just going to dive right into this, and I would love to know about your journey. What led you to start Kelvin? What led you to hop into entrepreneurship? How did this all come about?
Yeah, God, it's kind of like it's not a long story, but it kind of seems like it is. So I got my research and experience in undergrad and grad school is in material science
Okay.
with a focus on organic electronics. So you've heard of OLEDs, I
Yeah.
assume? So a lot of materials, a lot of research in organic light emitting diodes and organic solar cells. My first entrepreneurial experience was at a company called QD Vision. So QD Vision stands for quantum dot vision. If you're familiar with the Samsung QLED TVs, you know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah.
So Samsung acquired QD Vision, and that is the basis for that technology.
Okay.
I made no money in that transaction, but my expertise is in low dimensional materials, quantum dots for display applications. So
Okay.
very ridiculous and niche. The person who hired me at that company went to become a professor at Columbia, and I loved him, and so I just followed him. And I went to get my PhD with him, and in that lab, which is called the Columbia Laboratory for Unconventional Electronics, which is an
Okay.
awesome name, there was a heavy emphasis on entrepreneurship. And
Yeah.
so we do a lot of cool stuff. There was a lot of different projects and there was a lot of patent applications. One of the things I stumbled onto was my own heating in my apartment.
Okay.
So I lived in this kind of shithole. It was a nice apartment, but it was like a studio. It was really overheated. It was a steam heated, radiator heated building.
Yeah.
The real reason why I began looking into this is because my twin brother, who's a professional ballet dancer,
Oh,
got a job on Broadway, like a really good job on
cool.
Broadway. And he didn't know it was a new show, and he didn't know how long this was going to last. And so he slept on my floor and complained incessantly about the hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. Like he
Yeah.
just wouldn't stop. And so I built the first version of what is now called the Cozy as a means of controlling temperature in the apartment, and it worked really well. And that was the origin of that. But I'd say my entrepreneurial journey started earlier, just being exposed to it early as a non-founding employee,
Yeah.
and then kind of liking that, being interested in doing that again, and looking for opportunities to do it.
Cool. How does the stuff that you learned about in the display space translate into heating and cooling?
It doesn't, except that when people learn you have a PhD, they're like, "Oh, you must be smart." It's like, no, there are a lot of dumb people who have PhDs, and people, I think, I'm not going to say naively, but often it's considered that what you learn in your PhD or in school, you apply in the real world. And that's obviously not true, right? Almost nothing of what you learn in school, PhD included, is used in your day-to-day life.
Mhm.
In that context, what I learned at QD Vision doesn't need to be applied. What I was doing at QD Vision was trying to figure out a product,
Yeah.
something that worked, and establishing a process for testing that, hypothesizing, and building stuff that functioned. And I think that is what has been applied universally in what I do.
Cool. And when you decided to start a company around this, so you go from like building a prototype because your brother is complaining about the heating, what then turns that into an actual company for you?
That's the step that I think most people don't take because they don't have experience doing it. But it was
Yeah.
very easy for me in my position in that lab to apply for a patent. My perspective then was I could apply for this on my own because the school didn't really contribute to that. I applied through the school because I wanted to use the school as a test bed for the technology. So
Okay.
I basically gave them a large ownership of the IP.
Yeah.
I licensed it back, and then I was like, "Hey, Columbia, you want to test this out in your facilities?" And they were like, "Yeah, let's do that." And then from that small step, I'd say the big step after that was we competed in a bunch of Cleantech business competitions.
Okay.
And we won a few of them and one very big one. And that really launched the company in its most official sense.
What was the most surprising thing to you leaning into this entrepreneurial stuff? You have support, but there's always stuff that you just don't expect, right? So what was the
Yeah, totally. I could sum it up in something that one of my first big investors refers to as schlep blindness, which is
Okay.
that first time founders
Yeah.
are entirely blind to the schlep that they're embarking on.
Okay.
I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And to go into more detail on what that was essentially, I had this radiator cover. It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple to build. It's simple to sell-ish, but the process to get it certified as an energy efficiency technology
Yeah.
was outrageous.
Yeah.
We got funding from NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy Research Development Authority. It took 8 years to get the technology into what's called the technical resource manual, where you have to be to get incentives. And that is an outrageous amount of time. Like,
Yeah.
that's longer than most startups
Last.
exist or
Yeah.
even sell. That was the biggest surprise, and it continued to be a very big surprise for a very long time. And to add insult to injury, we were entered into the New York State Technical Resource Manual in December of 2019. So we were
Okay.
like, "All right, we finally did it."
Ready
And
to
then like a few
go.
months later, guess wasn't happening anymore. Any access to any apartments. It took a while for us to get beyond that.
I've heard a couple interesting stories about navigating lockdowns recently. I'm curious, what happened for you? Did you just have to put everything on hold? Did you have the resources to just carry on?
We weren't allowed to do any in-unit work. We did what we could. We spent a lot of time thinking about what we were doing. We actually developed a new product during that time. The PPP loans are what got us through. We had one big contract that was put on pause. Once things relaxed and we developed a personal protective equipment strategy, started making revenue again. That was really painful.
I'm curious, do you think there's anything I mean, there's something unique to your situation in terms of the background you had, the context in the lab. Do you think there's anything to the sort of ecosystem in New York that in particular is helpful to the kind of thing that you're doing or
People consider us like the OG hardware company because we've
Okay.
been around for so long. Much fewer resources for startups than there are today. There's all kinds of accelerators today, and it's great. We benefit from that somewhat, but we were like the first ones that were
Yeah.
still building the programs, et cetera.
Yeah.
Our market's New York. It's every bigger, older city, but New York City is the STEAM capital of the world.
Mhm.
So all the customers we could ever need are here. And it's just a great place for us to be in a location where most of your early customers are. So you can
Of course.
make, yeah, I mean, outside of that, the finance industry here is really helpful because that's been one of the biggest unlocks for us, honestly, in terms of sales, is
Absolutely.
financing the product. New York City is a great place to have a startup, except that the labor is really expensive
Mhm.
and the space is really expensive.
Yeah.
So if the pros can outweigh the cons, then it's great.
Are you currently working in other markets?
We have deployments all over the Eastern Seaboard, but I'd say 98% of them are in New York City.
Yeah.
We're raising another round, and that round is predicated on, we've established our growth in New York City, and now we want to replicate in other regions. There are many that make really good sense for us right now, and we want to hire teams that focus on them.
I'm curious in the sort of hardware and sustainability, like the intersection of hardware and sustainability, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening there. I think
Argue
it's
it's where everything is happening,
yeah.
honestly. Well, people have very different takes on this, but
Uh-huh.
sorry to hijack your question,
No,
but
go
like
for it.
the era where a piece of software is going to make a huge difference in efficiency
Yeah.
is kind of over. The things that need to be harnessed and reined in are not controllable via software.
Yeah.
And so I think that to really make the next step in sustainability for a number of different things, you really have to have the hardware to do it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like I've seen over the past 5 plus years a lot more emphasis being put in hardware, both at the consumer-ish level. I say consumer, like you're not consumer, you're selling to buildings, right? If I understand
Mhm.
correctly.
That's right.
But it's still dealing like people's lives. I'm seeing now a lot more stuff in mining and industrial sectors.
Yes, yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff going on these days. Really interesting ways to tackle problems, and it's all I guess I'm going to walk back a little bit on the hardware thing. I
Yeah,
think that you have to have physical stuff to do things physically,
yeah.
right? There's a lot of cool stuff on like using like growing plants in a field and then burning it to extract metals that the plants are designed to extract. Just cool stuff like that. There's a lot of awesome things going on in industrial world, effluent management, a lot of cool stuff on mining. Agreed.
Yeah, so with that context, I'm kind of curious. You mentioned you're raising another round. What does that ecosystem look like for you right now? We've had some ups and downs lately, generally in like venture capital and in the sort of tech and startup ecosystems, like more broadly. I feel like I'm seeing here in British Columbia and in Canada, a lot more emphasis being put on clean tech investments. Um,
Yeah, it's been up and down.
okay.
There's like the big Cleantech crunch, was that 2010-ish or whatever it was? And we founded on the back end of that. It wasn't a great time to be raising money in clean tech.
Yeah.
And that was another weird time. I think the golden days of clean tech investing were like 2022, 2021. And now it's getting a little weird in the States, at least, because there's political question marks,
Yeah.
which mean maybe incentives question marks. I mean, there's still an emphasis. On one hand, can you make a lot of money? Some of the multiples in clean tech are not that great.
Hmm.
And on the other hand, can we afford not to make these improvements, even if they're not the biggest money makers on earth? I think both those things are kind of fighting each other. We're in a position where our numbers are really good. We're in pretty good shape for funding, but that's not true of a lot of companies out there right now. It's a tough environment because everyone's trying to raise money. Interest rates still aren't great, and a
Yeah.
lot of companies rely on that. I think more and more people are seeing clean tech as not only a place where you can make money, but where philanthropic dollars could be uniquely enabling too. It's just the people who work in clean tech are not necessarily working in clean tech because they want to make a lot of money, right? Like
Yeah.
a lot of people are. It's crazy how many people are moving into clean tech because they feel this. Maybe they just had kids, something like that. Like they have an existential dread
Yeah.
of what could happen if these problems aren't solved. And that's certainly why I'm here. Yeah, it is interesting, and the fundraising market is always a up down question mark thing. I don't know what's like in Canada. In the United States, it's a little bit rough right now.
Yeah, I feel like given that we're a small ecosystem placed next to a behemoth, we kind of get dragged along, is
Sure,
what it feels like.
there's a lot of
Uh,
good companies in Canada.
that in mind, I'm curious. You mentioned the motivations of people going into clean tech. How does that affect setting a vision, mission for your company? How do you hire? All of these operational things tie into why people approach this sector.
Yeah, as a startup, we have funding limitations. We're not going to be able to pay as much as Peloton. The pull of climate tech
Mhm.
allows you to get better people than you otherwise would.
Yeah.
And especially in New York City, where we're competing against ad tech, where you're gonna get paid way more than we could ever pay you. I think that's the biggest implication of working in this. You get people who are really passionate about it,
Yeah.
don't necessarily need to make $1 million a year, and are still going to put a lot of effort into it. People are driven in this market because it is so important.
I think something like do well by doing good or
Yeah,
something. I totally get it.
usually co-opted by industries that are just greenwashing what they're doing.
Can you speak to that? Because you're probably competing with a lot of people who are doing greenwashing, who are saying that they'll provide some solution that competes with you, but isn't actually
Oh, totally. I
really.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, there are a few pet peeves that I have. I'll share one without saying anything bad about the carbon credit market,
Mhm.
right? That's made a lot of companies,
Yeah.
and it's a valuable market. We don't do anything in it because if you entomb carbon for 1,000 years or 10,000 years, whatever it is,
Yeah.
you get paid $50 for that ton of carbon entombed. If you avoid the burning and creation of a ton of carbon, you get $7. So like the market is really bizarre. And
Yeah.
the thing I want to point out in the market, which is ridiculous, is how not cutting down a forest has kind of overtaken the entire market.
Yeah.
And if you tell them you're not going to cut down your backyard, you can get a lot of money for it. There's been a lot of research recently showing that is horrible. It doesn't work at all, and there's enormous amounts of fraud. That whole market is kind of messed up because an aspect of greenwashing, right? Like, oh, I'm not going to cut down this 1,000 acres, and you're going to pay me money, and then it's going to suddenly create this huge benefit on a climate sense, and it doesn't. Right?
I'm kind of curious, actually. I realize we haven't really talked much about the product. Tell me more about the actual product. You mentioned the story that started it all, so I think we have a sense of it. I've looked around your website and checked it all out, but yeah, tell me more
Yeah.
about.
So we have one product that is the basis of all our growth, and then a third that's kind of future,
Okay.
and try to figure out the best way to introduce it. So we started out with this cozy. It's an
Yeah.
efficiency product for rare buildings. Let's get control of these systems because they're horribly wasteful. It's one of the most inefficient building stocks in the world. It works by stopping heat from transferring into a room when it has enough heat.
Yeah.
Since the system is pressurized steam, if you're not condensing in one area, that steam remains pressurized to float to a low pressure area where steam is condensing, where heat is being transferred to a room. We're able to balance out the heat transfer in a building, which stays between 25 and 40% without
Okay.
going into too many details about the physics. The second product, and so that's what we should do with all our radiator heated buildings, right? There's two things you can do with a building with radiators. You can make it more efficient or you can electrify it.
Okay.
And it turns out that electrifying these buildings is outrageously hard. If
Okay.
you had to estimate how many buildings in New York City
Yeah.
of the type we work with, like larger multifamily, have electrified, what would you guess?
I have no idea.
2 complexes. There's a few smaller buildings on the order of 10 or 15 apartments that have electrified, but of the larger buildings, there's two. And one is an NYU dorm.
Okay.
One was a NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority conversion. They're doing all these conversions to make them privately owned by a corporation for like 99 years. In exchange, the corporation has to put a lot of money into the building and upgrade it.
Okay.
Both complexes started their work 3 years ago. They're both vacant.
Yeah.
Still, because the work's still being done.
Okay.
So it's 3 years of vacancy and tens of millions of dollars to do it.
Yeah.
The amount of work required and the cost to do it is just crazy, and no one's ever going to do it if they're not required. And why you can do it because they have more money than anybody. And NYCHA no longer requires it for their contracts because it was so onerous. The barriers are vast.
Yeah.
Finances is one part, and that's a big one. But procedurally, it's a bigger one. Buildings have heating plants. Let's talk about America. Buildings have heating plants.
Yeah.
You paid for your heating system.
Yeah.
Are you going to replace it before it dies? The
Yeah.
answer is almost always no, because nobody does that. So you wait until it dies. When do you think heating systems typically die? They break when used.
Okay.
They break in February.
When you need them.
Yeah, it's an utter emergency.
Yeah.
And 96% of all heating plant failures in the US are replaced with the exact same system. So you lock in another 20 or 30 years of natural gas consumption.
Yeah.
And this is what happens everywhere. If you think like that's the US number. Multifamily, like you have 100 families now that are not heated in February, there's no way they're going to consider a sustainable upgrade.
Yeah.
And so our pathway is let's get control of our systems, I mentioned.
Yeah.
Product number 2 is called hybrid electrification. What we're doing with this product is deploying a commodity heat pump that works above freezing, and you use the radiator system below freezing. So you can install it now. We attach to this heat pump a thermal battery system, so you can do demand response. And in all the regions where you find these big steam buildings, demand response and grid services are valuable because you have a stressed electricity grid. And so we can monetize the demand response of these systems and generate enough revenue to pay for the entire implementation of the technology. So we literally install it for free in buildings. Every day that's not peak air conditioning, we use that battery to do what's called peak shaving.
Okay.
And so this is getting really technical, I apologize. But in these big buildings, they're on a commercial rate typically, and half their electricity charge, more or less, is how much is called the demand charge, which is their maximum draw during the month or a day or whatever their rate is.
Yeah.
We reduce that a ton because we shave all the conditioning consumption to an off-peak time.
Yeah.
The end result is we monetize demand response to pay for implementation. And then we reduce their peak demand charge so much that heating costs less than natural gas heating.
Okay.
And so it's free and it lowers their operating costs. And it turns out that 75% of heating is done above freezing temperatures. So we get 75% for free.
Wow.
So that's step 2.
Yeah.
And step 2 lines you up for step 3, which is when the boiler dies, we're in the building with a plan to fully electrify. And we've already installed all these heat pumps and units designed to integrate into a full electrification solution. So the final step costs less than a boiler replacement. Everything we're trying to do at Kelvin is to create a pathway towards full electrification that is driven financially. There's no emotion that has to be in this equation for it to move forward. Because there is no emotion. I mean, there's people who run these buildings, but they're businesses. They're fiduciarily responsible to make money.
Yeah.
And we just need to align that with decarbonization.
That makes a lot of sense. If there's no reason for them not to do it, why wouldn't they? Cool. No, that was really cool, actually. And so long term, what's the pathway to getting all of this in every building around the world?
Yeah, I mean, we're deploying a lot of units this year. We're 10xing our deployments.
Yeah.
And that's the cozy. We're releasing hybrid electrification late next year commercially. And that'll be a free upgrade to all existing cozy deployments, more or less. And then we'll start selling in multiple cities next year. And eventually we'll start doing these free upgrades to hybrid electrification. I think the market's going to like a free thing that removes liability. Our job is literally to make it free and make buildings money as a course of business.
Cool.
And if we can do that, we can deploy it at scale.
I love it. That's awesome. Can I ask which markets you're moving into?
Where urban areas have good energy efficiency incentives and have grid issues that will pay for it.
Okay.
And that's Chicago, Boston, a lot of the Exelon territories, Baltimore, etc. And I think that list will expand because energy efficiency is going to become more important. Grids are only going to get more stressed, particularly if we start electrifying heating in the winter.
Yeah.
So those demand response revenues will start creeping up.
Out of curiosity, you ever thought about Canada?
Yeah, we're looking at Toronto already. I think we have a project we're scoping in Toronto. So that's one of the places we've been speaking to.
How about Montreal?
Montreal as well. I spent the summer in Montreal. I went to McGill for summer school.
Oh, nice.
It was awesome. Yeah.
I study at Concordia, and I feel like a lot of Montreal buildings could use your solutions.
Yeah, although I will say, it's a more aggressive cooling market, right? Or heating market, right? So it's much colder there. And so,
Yeah.
depending on where you are on the Earth, you're going to need more or less cooling. So you get farther south and we electrify more with this hybrid approach.
Got
Further north, you less. That doesn't mean it doesn't make sense at all. It's just that you get less decarbonization over the course of a year the further north you go. It all depends on the economics.
Yeah.
It still sets you up for full electrification to a certain extent. But I see it being valuable everywhere.
Yeah.
And then if we're in Canada, we can always do a cold climate heat pump. It's not like a huge delta, but
Yeah.
there is a technological jump and a cost jump when you go to cold climate.
I'm kind of curious if you have any advice specific. People who want to come work for you, people who want to work in the field, people who want to get into sustainability.
I use recruiters very rarely
Hmm.
because I never find who I want through a recruiter. It's mostly network.
Okay.
If you want to get into Cleantech, go to the Cleantech events, the business plan competitions, but more so go to the accelerator events, go to Climate Week and those events. That's where you meet all the entrepreneurs. When you speak to people and you have a common interest, you learn more about it. It's very hard to get into an industry like that when you've never worked in a startup and there's not clear overlap between what you're doing and what they need.
Yeah.
But you can move in that direction. You can start doing projects with companies and things like that. And it really depends on where you are in your life, right? If you're in university, super easy.
Yeah.
If you want to get into it after you've had a career for 20 or 30 years, it's a lot harder, but it's still definitely doable. But I'd say the first step is really to meet those people, talk to them, get to know them, offer help where you can, show that you can bring a lot to the table.
Awesome. I love it. It is that time. I'm going to ask you for a product that you'd like to shout out.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing right now is the computer I'm using, which is a framework computer. I hate buying pre-assembled laptops that
Yeah.
then you throw out and buy a new one. So the framework is awesome because it's not that expensive. It's as much as a normal laptop.
Yeah.
But you buy, the memory, you buy the hard drive, you buy the keyboard, you buy the mouse, you buy the screen. And if any of those things break, you can replace it without buying a new laptop. So I'm a big fan of them. And I met their director of products the other day and
Oh,
she was
cool.
totally awesome.
Do
Yeah.
they have people in New York? Are they New York based?
No, I met them at a Yale event, a
Okay.
Yale entrepreneur or Cleantech event.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
super
So-
cool company.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Marshall. I've learned a lot. It's really interesting to understand your journey and your industry. I feel like I haven't gotten the opportunity to talk to a lot of people in this kind of like B2B to C sort of hardware is kind of unique and interesting.
It's very interesting.
yeah.
People are often very surprised about how the sales process goes just by virtue of who we're actually selling to and who benefits. Is unique.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the chat.
Thank you for your time.
All right.
It's awesome.
See ya.
See you here.
Folks, that was my interview with Dr. Marshall Cox, founder of Kelvin. I learned so much in our chat. I really hope you did too. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like the work that we do, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button or find us on sustainabletechpodcast.com where you can subscribe in whatever podcast app you like best. Leave us a review, leave us a rating. It's really helpful for us. We're a tiny team and every little bit of support really helps us out. In the meantime, we all want to do something good in the world, so go out there and build something good, folks. I will see you in the next one. See ya.